Until very recently, I've had a noticeable aversion to classic fantasy media. If there wasn't a unique twist, the worlds of mages, knights, and dragons actually drove me away instead of drawing me in. How, in a genre of building fantastic worlds, do so many of them end up being the same generic one? Why does something as magnificent as magic always seem to bore me? Magic should be fantastic, a fundamental element of the world that causes a cascading effect both large and small on everything around it. I'll admit, when it comes to fantasy, I have bias. But in a unique twist, within the last year, Frieren Beyond Journey's End challenged my predisposition. While it seems to follow a handful of common fantasy tropes, it constantly finds new ways to explore worn-out ideas. Yes, at first glance, Frieren's magic system and world seems just as simple, but there are surprising layers of depth. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about the interesting thing about Frieren's magic. 9 months ago, near the beginning of this series, I made a video about the parallels between Frieren's magic system and science, exploring how if magic were to exist, people would aim to study and understand it. Despite its boring reputation, science is actually rooted in discovery. It aims to decipher the endless complexity that is the natural universe, and that excitement being fully utilized in a world with magic makes for a fascinating exploration. But actually, today we're looking at the inverse. A rule introduced to Frieren's magic system that moves it a little away from science and more into the realm of the fantastic, a refreshing take on a classic foundation, because Frieren's magic system is rooted in believing something is possible, asking, if you can't imagine something happening, how would you conjure it into existence? The first hints of this idea are introduced pretty early. For example, in the second episode, Frieren is unable to produce a flower she's never seen, but it isn't fully explored until much later during the mage exam. Initially, it's a limitation, but this character, Ubel, challenges that entire structure, seemingly breaking previously established rules. And despite the fact that I'd normally advocate against something like this, I think it enhances the story, but we'll get to that in a second. Frieren's magic system in its initial introduction is actually pretty simple. It's structured around mana and technique. But Ubel's character shifts this. She's introduced as someone that's a bit crazy. The German word Ubel literally means bad, and in her first scene we find out she has no issue killing bandits who threaten her. Her character design and animation present her as incredibly nonchalant. From the very beginning, she's written to come across as disconnected and maybe a bit insane. We find out as the story goes on that she's a mage that uses intuition. This introduces a new rule to Frieren's magic system. Multiple people in my comment section have made an apt comparison to Frieren's magic and music, the difference between those who learn by theory and those who learn by ear. This music metaphor represents something that's a crucial part of any of this working, which is that Frieren's magic often takes full advantage of intuition, because Ubel's feeling-based understanding of magic gives her a trump card. In a previous mage exam, she was prompted with breaking through a seemingly impenetrable barrier, a cloak covered in magic that made it so nothing could break through. But her primary magic is a cutting spell, so it was easy for her to imagine cutting through something like cloth. Now, on paper, I think that this entire decision is a recipe for disaster, baking in an ill-defined trump card that allows people to just overcome the pre-established rules of what makes magic strong. It's a recipe for disaster unless used very carefully. Because if magic systems are incorporating essentially what is a cheat code, it should be clearly defined. Otherwise, you lose the ability to solve problems with magic. So why do I believe that this is a positive impact on the story, not a negative one? Why do so many members of my audience enjoy the introduction of this concept? Well, it has to do with hard versus soft magic systems, and the purpose magic serves in Frieren's story. Defining hard and soft magic systems is a little tricky because mostly the terms being used colloquially. There are general understandings, but there's a little bit of disagreement in actual definition. The term hard and soft magic system was actually coined semi-recently, likely inspired by hard and soft sci-fi, a term that's been around for a while now. My understanding of hard and soft magic systems mostly comes from the guy who coined the term, Brandon Sanderson. He actually talks about the origin on his website, specifically when discussing his 3 laws of magic. My definition of hard magic for today's video specifically has to do with 2 major components, rules and explanation. Hard magic follows rules. These don't have to be logical or sound, just consistent. A causes B. But more than just rules, the audience has to understand them. Now, this is far from the only way magic systems can be used in a story, and in reality, hard and soft magic systems exist on a spectrum, not a binary. Soft magic systems give less information to the audience and sometimes even adhere to less rules. The purpose is creating a sense of wonder, putting characters in a fantastic world. Some people argue the only important distinction between hard and soft magic is how much information the audience is given. But I think you gotta factor in the rules of a system. Soft magic systems can strictly or loosely follow a rule set, but the harder the magic system, the more important it is to be consistent. Rules shouldn't be subverted or broken without proper explanation. Now, the reason I'm defining this is because recently I asked my audience about the topic of today's video, and I found a lot of people had a variety of different opinions and perspectives. So does visualization make Friren's magic system harder or softer? So visualization actually influences Friren's magic system in two different ways. The first is in creating limitations. Take this conversation between Xeria and Flamma, where Flamma argues that neither her or Xeria will be the one to kill the Demon King. Magic is a world of visualization, and neither of them can visualize themselves living in a time of peace. This rule is restrictive. It works in conjunction and doesn't undermine previously established rules of the magic, therefore making the system harder. And it's incredibly intuitive, easy to understand. That'll be important later. Whereas the second edition of visualization in Ubel is the idea of a trump card. Despite how much mana is poured into a defense or how strong a spell should be, if Ubel can imagine herself cutting through it, she can. Specifically in this case applied to intuitive things like cloth and hair. This is an interesting addition, but one that undermines previous rules. It's been established that more mana and better technique equals a stronger spell. When it comes to this aspect of the addition of visualization, the limits aren't specified, therefore making the system softer, because they never explain the limits to visualization. If she's able to subvert the rules of magic, why can't she cast her spells at a larger range? Why do certain restrictions apply but others don't? This isn't specified, and it's incredibly open-ended. But I do think there's a reason Frieren gets away with this, because they don't use it often, they don't use it to bail out our main characters, and they only ever use it when it feels intuitively right. Ubel isn't cutting entire pillars of stone in half that she shouldn't be able to, just things that are magically more powerful than she is but should be easy to cut. Soft and hard magic systems aren't better and worse, they're just different, they serve different goals. The most common frustration I've seen with hard magic systems is the fact that it can very often feel like a chore. Hard magic systems sometimes come with an overwhelming amount of information and explanation. They can be hard to follow and sometimes feel like they're pulling the audience away from the story, which is the exact inverse of what magic is supposed to do in fantasy. It's supposed to enhance the story, not take away from it. But then again, I personally love hard magic systems. I think well-crafted magic can do so much for a story, especially when it comes to elevating stakes and conflict. Which leads us into the third and final point of this video. What purpose does magic serve in Friren's story? Brandon Sanderson's first rule of magic argues that an author's ability to solve problems with magic is directly proportionate to the audience's understanding. So if you're creating solutions to problems with magic, you want to make it very clear the limitations and consequences, the rules that it's built from. But Frieren isn't a story that focuses a lot on high stakes. The characters are rarely in serious danger. The story is significantly more about personal growth and struggle, the world that it takes place in, than the action and stakes. And with the introduction of visualization, both in the way that it restricts the magic, but also subverts it, Friren's story is enhanced. Not just in the primary cast, but also the ensemble surrounding them. Friren's Mage Exam arc is all about exploring the impacts of magic on the world. So expanding that magic and making it feel a little bit more wonderful does a lot for this story. Because earlier I said that this decision was dangerous if the writers weren't careful. So thank goodness they did such a good job.